The afternoon sun was slowly sinking behind the school buildings, casting long shadows across the pavement. The children poured out of the gates, some laughing, some running, and others dragging their heavy bags as if the day had drained every drop of energy from them. Among them was a young black girl named Aisha. She was quiet, with gentle eyes, and she often walked alone. She liked to take the long way home, through the side street lined with trees, because it gave her peace after. The noisy day that day, however, peace did not follow her. As she turned the corner, 3 boys stepped in front of her, blocking the narrow street. They were older than her, bigger, and their grins were the kind that carried trouble. One of them snatched at her backpack strap. Another laughed and said cruel things about her hair. The words cut deeper than the tug at her bag. They laughed as though hurting her gave them joy. Aisha clutched her bag tightly to her chest. Her heart raced, but she tried to stay calm. She told herself to keep walking, to ignore them, to not show fear. But they moved with her, circling, taunting. One shoved her shoulder lightly, just enough to unbalance her. The other 2 laughed louder. The world around her suddenly felt empty, as if every passerby had vanished, leaving her trapped in a circle of meanness. Then came a voice, shaky but firm. It was not loud, yet it carried through the air like a sudden breeze. "Leave her alone," the voice said. The boys stopped, confused for a moment. Their heads turned toward the source. There, a few steps away, stood Daniel, a boy from her class. He wasn't the tallest or the strongest. In fact, he was known for being quiet, always sitting near the back, scribbling in his notebook. But now, something inside him refused to stay silent. His fists were clenched at his sides, his face pale, but his eyes, those eyes were filled with a kind of determination that surprised even him. The bullies sneered. "Or what?" one of them asked, taking a step toward him. Daniel's legs trembled slightly and his throat felt dry, but he did not step back. He swallowed hard and repeated louder this time, "I said leave her alone." It was not the kind of voice that roared like a hero from a movie. It was the voice of a boy terrified yet unwilling to do nothing. And sometimes that kind of voice can be more powerful than any scream. The bullies exchanged looks. They were used to people avoiding them, looking down, walking away. No one ever challenged them. But here was Daniel, skinny, nervous, standing in front of them like a fragile wall, yet a wall that refused to move. "Mind your own business," one boy growled, trying to shove past him. Daniel stood his ground. His body jolted from the push, but his feet planted harder into the concrete. His hands shook, but his chin lifted. "It is my business," he said, the words trembling but clear. A silence fell for a brief second. The street, once filled with cruel laughter, now felt heavy. The bullies laughed again, but their laughter sounded forced. One muttered under his breath, "Whatever, she's not worth it." They threw one last glare at Daniel before turning away. Their footsteps faded. Their mocking voices carried down another street, and just like that, the storm passed. Aisha stood frozen, her bag still clutched tight. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with tears she had fought to hold back. She had never expected anyone to stand up for her, especially not Daniel. Her voice wavered when she whispered, "Thank you." Daniel nodded, his chest rising and falling quickly. He was still shaking, still trying to believe he had just done that. He felt the fear lingering in his body, but also something new, something warm. It was pride, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that whispered to him that doing the right thing mattered. The 2 of them walked slowly down the street together, neither speaking at first. The silence between them wasn't heavy like before. It was lighter, safer. Aisha glanced at him and saw not just the shy boy from her class, but someone who had chosen courage when it was hardest. Daniel, on the other hand, kept stealing glances at her, realizing that sometimes protecting someone else also saves a piece of yourself. That day might have looked ordinary from a distance, just 2 kids walking home after school. But for them, it was a day neither would forget. Because in that moment, when cruelty tried to win, courage rose up in the heart of a quiet boy, and kindness found its defender. Daniel's heart was still pounding in his chest as the bullies disappeared around the corner. He could hear his own breath rushing in and out, fast and uneven. His palms were sweaty and his legs felt like they might collapse. Yet despite the fear clinging to him, he stayed where he was, standing tall beside Aisha. He had no idea where the courage had come from, only that it was stronger than the voice inside his head telling him to run. The bullies might have left, but their laughter still echoed in Daniel's ears. Aisha hugged her bag tightly and tried to wipe her tears before they could fall. Her voice was quiet, almost too soft to hear. "Why did you do that?" she asked, not out of doubt but out of surprise. No one had ever spoken up for her like that, not even teachers who saw the way she was treated sometimes. Daniel looked at her, his throat dry. "Because it wasn't right," he said. His words were simple, but they carried weight. He didn't think of himself as brave, he didn't feel like a hero. He just knew the moment demanded something, and if he had walked away, he wouldn't have been able to forgive himself. The two of them started walking again, but the air around them was different now. For Aisha, it was no longer filled with fear. For Daniel, it was filled with a strange mix of nerves and relief. His legs still shook, but with each step he took, the shaking turned into something steadier. He had faced something that scared him, and though his voice trembled, he had not broken. The following day at school, whispers floated through the corridors. Some students had seen what happened and others had heard the story passed along. Daniel felt the eyes on him as he walked to class. Some looked at him with surprise, others with admiration. A few even, with disbelief. The bullies, though, kept their distance, throwing him dirty looks but never daring to test him again. Aisha walked into the classroom, holding her books tightly against her chest. She glanced around nervously, worried the bullies might cause her trouble again. But when her eyes met Daniel's across the room, she felt a strange comfort. For the first time, she didn't feel completely alone. Later that afternoon, during lunch break, Aisha found Daniel sitting alone under a tree. He was sketching something in his notebook. His head was bent low as if he was trying to disappear into the page. She walked over and hesitated before speaking. "Can I sit here?" she asked. Daniel looked up, blinking, and nodded quickly, moving his books to make space. They sat together in silence at first, Daniel drawing lines on his paper, Aisha fiddling with the corner of her lunchbox. Finally, she whispered, "You were really brave yesterday?" Daniel gave a nervous laugh. "I was scared out of my mind," he admitted. "My knees were shaking the whole time." Aisha's eyes softened. "That's what makes it brave," she said. "Doing something even when you're scared." The words stayed with Daniel. He had never thought about courage that way. He had always believed bravery meant not being afraid at all. But hearing her say it made him realize the truth. His fear hadn't made him weak, it had made his choice stronger. From that day, a quiet bond began to grow between them. They started walking home together. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they walked in silence, but it no longer felt like silence. It felt like companionship, like safety, like the world wasn't so heavy when shared. Daniel noticed how Aisha would still flinch if she heard cruel laughter behind them. He noticed the way her shoulders tightened when they passed the corner where the bullies had once stood. And though he felt the same unease, he made sure to walk just a little closer, his presence a reminder that she wasn't facing it alone anymore. One afternoon as they walked, Aisha told him about her father, about how he always told her to stay strong no matter what people said. Her voice wavered, and her eyes shone with a sadness Daniel didn't fully understand. But he listened, really listened. And in that moment, Aisha felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Heard. For Daniel, defending her that day had seemed like a small thing. But he didn't realize how big it was to Aisha. It was not just about bullies walking away. It was about someone choosing to stand by her when she had expected no one to. That choice had changed something inside her. A piece of her heart no longer felt invisible. At night, Daniel replayed the scene in his head, sometimes still trembling at how close he had been to getting punched. But then he remembered Aisha's smile, small and grateful, and he knew it had been worth it. Fear, he realized, fades with time, but regret lasts much longer, and he was glad, deeply glad, that he had chosen courage. Though they were just children, That moment had carved a mark in both their lives. For Daniel, it was the first time he discovered what it meant to protect someone. For Aisha, it was the first time she discovered she didn't have to face cruelty alone. And together, they had begun a story that was only just unfolding. The days that followed felt different for both Daniel and Aisha. At school, they no longer passed each other like strangers. They had started to walk together in the mornings, and sometimes they even sat near each other in the classroom. The other kids noticed, and whispers spread quickly. Some said Daniel only did it for attention. Some said he was crazy for standing up to the bullies. But most admired him quietly, even if they never said it out loud. For Aisha, walking through the hallways no longer felt like walking through a storm. She still heard comments, still caught sneers from some students, but now there was a difference. She was not alone anymore. Beside her was Daniel, and that made all the difference. One afternoon after school, as they walked home, Aisha turned to him and said softly, "You don't have to keep walking with me. You know, they'll just keep bothering you too." Daniel shrugged, adjusting the strap of his bag. "Maybe they will, but so what?" he said. "I don't mind. I'd rather be bothered than see you get hurt." His words were plain, but to Aisha, they felt like armor wrapped around her heart. Slowly, their friendship began to grow stronger. They would talk about schoolwork, about teachers they liked and didn't like, about the shows they watched at home. Daniel found himself laughing, more around her, not the polite kind of laugh, but the real kind, the kind that made him feel lighter. Aisha, too, began to share more. She told him about her favorite books, about how she loved to draw but always hid her sketches because she feared people would laugh. Daniel, surprised, showed her his own notebook filled with little doodles and half-finished sketches. At first he hesitated, embarrassed, but when Aisha's eyes lit up, he felt proud. She traced the drawings gently with her finger, smiling. "You're really good," she whispered. Daniel blushed but smiled too. For the first time, he realized that the things he kept hidden could actually connect him to someone else. Their classmates started to notice how close they had become. Some teased them, calling them names, while others simply watched with quiet curiosity. The bullies, however, were no longer as bold as before. Every time they saw Daniel and Aisha together, they remembered the day Daniel had stood up to them. It had shaken their control, and even though they mocked from a distance, they didn't dare repeat the same scene. One day during recess, a group of kids gathered around a bench to hear the story retold. A boy who had seen the fight bragged about how Daniel had faced down the bullies, exaggerating parts of it, making Daniel sound like a fearless warrior. Daniel overheard and felt embarrassed. He wanted to tell them it wasn't like that he had been terrified. But when he looked at Aisha's proud smile as she listened, he stayed quiet. Aisha never forgot the way he had stood in front of her. That memory replayed in her mind often, especially at night when she lay awake, remembering all the times she had felt invisible. Daniel's act had given her something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She carried that hope with her, and it gave her strength to walk taller, to meet eyes she used to avoid. But it wasn't just Aisha who changed. Daniel changed too. He had always thought of himself as just another quiet boy blending into the background. But now people saw him differently, and he began to see himself differently too. He wasn't suddenly fearless, but he understood that courage was a choice, and that gave him a sense of purpose. One evening, as they walked past the same corner where the bullies had first stopped Aisha, she slowed down. Her eyes flickered to the spot, and her steps grew heavy, Daniel noticed. He walked a little closer and said gently, "Don't worry, they're not here." Aisha nodded but admitted, "Every time I see this place, I still feel scared." Daniel thought for a moment, then smiled. "Then we'll just walk past it together every day until you don't feel scared anymore." The words were simple, but they sank deep into Aisha's heart. She realized that sometimes healing didn't come from forgetting, but from having someone beside you as you face the memory again and again. That night she told her mother about Daniel, about how he had stood up for her and how he now walked with her. Her mother listened with tears in her eyes and whispered, "That boy has a good heart. As weeks turned into months, Daniel and Aisha's bond became something more than just friendship. It became a shield against the world. It became proof that even small acts of kindness can change lives. Their laughter became brighter, their steps lighter. And though the world still had its cruel edges, together they learned how to soften them. Neither of them knew that this simple friendship was about to carry them into a story that reached far, beyond their school and their neighborhood. For now, all they knew was that when life felt heavy, it felt lighter when shared. And that was enough. Weeks passed, and the small story of Daniel standing up for Aisha did not fade away. Instead, it spread like a ripple through the community. At first, it was just the students whispering about it. Then teachers began to notice too. One teacher, Mrs. Johnson, mentioned it during a staff meeting. She spoke about how rare it was to see such courage in someone so young. Her words touched the hearts of the other teachers, and slowly, the story grew. One Saturday afternoon, the school hosted a small community event. Parents, teachers, and local residents gathered in the auditorium. Children performed songs. Some read poems, and there were displays of art from every class. Toward the end of the event, Mrs. Johnson took the stage to talk about kindness and courage. She told the audience about the day Daniel defended Aisha. She described how one boy's voice had broken the silence of cruelty, and how his choice had changed the way others looked at bullying. The audience listened quietly, some nodded, some clapped softly when she finished. Among them was a man named Patrick. He was a volunteer at the community center and often worked with charities that helped young people. Patrick was moved by the story. He believed in the power of kindness, and hearing about a young boy who acted with such courage gave him hope. After the event, Patrick spoke to Mrs. Johnson. He asked more about Daniel and Aisha. He wanted to know the details, not because he wanted attention, but because he thought their story deserved to be shared. Mrs. Johnson smiled warmly and said, "It's not about fame. It's about showing people that even the smallest voices can make a difference." Patrick agreed, but he also knew that sometimes sharing such stories could inspire many more. The next week, Patrick mentioned Daniel's story at a small gathering of local volunteers. One of them worked in a media office and thought it was the kind of story that could lift spirits in a world too often filled with sad headlines. They decided to write about it in a short community newsletter. The piece was small, tucked between announcements and local news, but it was heartfelt. It talked about a shy boy who stood up for a classmate and reminded everyone that bravery is not about size, but about heart. The newsletter traveled further than anyone expected. Copies were shared in cafes, in churches, in waiting rooms. Some people read it and smiled. Some read it and shared it with friends. One woman was so touched that she posted it online with the caption, "We need more Daniels in this world." Slowly, the story began to move beyond the little town. One day, Patrick received a call from an old friend who worked in the film industry. His friend had seen the online post and was curious. "Is this real?" he asked. Patrick assured him it was. His friend chuckled softly and said, "You'd be surprised how stories like this can inspire scripts, inspire hearts. Even big stars love hearing about simple acts of kindness." Patrick didn't think much of it at first, but then his friend added, "I know someone who would love this story, someone who values quiet bravery." Patrick raised his eyebrows, curious. His friend continued, "Keanu Reeves. He's known for being humble, for respecting kindness above all. He always asked me to share stories that remind him of the goodness in people." Patrick was stunned. The thought of a Hollywood star hearing about Daniel and Aisha seemed impossible. Yet there was something natural about it, as if the story itself wanted to travel further. Weeks later, Patrick received a message from his friend. He said he had shared the story with Keanu, and Keanu had been deeply moved. "He wants to know more," the message said. Patrick could hardly believe it. He thought back to that moment in the school auditorium, when Mrs. Johnson had simply wanted to celebrate kindness. None of them had imagined the story would cross so many miles. For Daniel and Aisha, life carried on as normal. They still walked home together, still shared laughter and secrets, unaware of the growing ripple their story had created. Daniel sometimes noticed strangers smiling at him in the grocery store, or neighbors nodding kindly. He didn't understand why, but he didn't mind. Aisha too felt the shift. It was as if the world had softened slightly. Neither of them knew that a man who had played heroes on the big screen had heard about them. Neither knew that their small corner of the world was about to connect with someone far beyond their reach. For now, they simply lived their days, two friends bound by one brave moment, never realizing that fate was already setting the stage for something extraordinary. The letter came quietly, without warning. It was delivered to the school office in a plain envelope, no bright stamps or fancy writing. Mrs. Johnson, curious, opened it and nearly dropped it when she read the name at the bottom. She hurried to find Daniel and Aisha after class, her eyes shining with excitement. When she showed them the letter, they both stared in disbelief. It was an invitation, written kindly and simply, asking if Daniel and Aisha would be willing to meet someone. The name at the end was one they recognized. Immediately, Keanu Reeves. Daniel blinked at the page, his mouth falling open. "This has to be a mistake," he whispered. Aisha clutched the paper carefully as if it might vanish. "Why would he want to meet us?" she asked softly. The school buzzed with whispers once the news slipped out. Some kids laughed and thought it was a prank. Others gasped and begged Daniel for details. Daniel didn't know what to say. He had never dreamed of meeting a movie star, let alone someone like Keanu Reeves. Yet the letter was real, and soon arrangements were made for a quiet, private meeting. The day finally came. The school gym had been prepared with chairs and a small table. No cameras, no flashing lights, just a simple space. Daniel and Aisha sat nervously, their hands clenched together under the table. Their hearts pounded like drums. The doors opened, and in walked Keanu Reeves, dressed simply in jeans and a dark jacket. His hair fell slightly into his face, and he carried himself with the calm ease of someone who had seen the world, but never let it change his kindness. He smiled warmly as he approached them. "Hi, I'm Keanu," he said, as if they didn't already know. His voice was gentle, not loud or commanding, but humble. Daniel felt his throat tighten, unable to speak. Aisha blinked rapidly, unsure if this was even real. Keanu pulled up a chair and sat with them, looking at them not like children, but like equals. "I heard about what you did," he said to Daniel. "Standing up when it was hard. Protecting someone who needed it, that takes real strength." Daniel's cheeks turned red. "I was scared," he admitted. Keanu nodded, his eyes kind. "That's what makes it strong. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act even when you're afraid." Aisha listened quietly, her heart swelling. Keanu turned to her. "And you?" he said softly. "You've been carrying a lot, haven't you?" Aisha's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. She nodded, whispering, "Sometimes it feels like the world doesn't want me to belong." Keanu leaned forward, his expression full of empathy. "The world needs people like you, strong, brave people who keep going even when it's hard." His words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. They talked for a long time. Keanu asked them about their lives, about school, about their dreams. He didn't rush, didn't treat the meeting like an obligation. He listened, really listened, and both children felt something rare. They felt seen, not just as kids in a small town, but as human beings whose voices mattered. At one point, Daniel asked shyly, "Why did you want to meet us?" Keanu paused for a moment, then smiled. "Because your story reminded me of what's important. In this world, people chase fame, money, power. But the truth is, kindness, courage, and friendship matter most. Your story reminded me of that, and I wanted to thank you." The room grew quiet as those words sank in. Aisha glanced at Daniel, her chest tightening with pride. To think that their small moment on the street could reach someone like Keanu Reeves was unbelievable. Yet here he was, telling them their courage had touched him. Then, something unexpected happened. Keanu leaned back, his expression shifting slightly. When Aisha mentioned her father's name in passing, telling Keanu about the lessons he had taught her before he passed away, Keanu froze. His eyes widened, his usual calm cracked for just a moment. He repeated the name slowly, almost. In disbelief, Daniel and Aisha looked at him, puzzled. "You knew him?" Aisha asked softly. Keanu's voice dropped, filled with memory. A long time ago, yes. The air grew heavier, charged with a strange connection. For a brief moment, the world outside the gym seemed to disappear. Only the three of them existed. In that circle of memory and fate, Aisha felt her heart race, not from fear this time, but from the strange sense that her father's presence was somehow still guiding her. Daniel sat quietly, trying to understand. Keanu finally smiled again, though there was a touch of sadness in his eyes. It seems the world is smaller than we think, he said gently. He didn't explain everything then, but his tone carried weight, as if a hidden story lingered in his past. When the meeting ended, Keanu hugged them both. Keep standing up for each other, he whispered. The world needs that more than anything. Daniel and Aisha held on to those words like treasure. They watched as he walked away, still stunned by what had just happened. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel and Aisha sat together on the curb outside school, replaying every word. In their minds, they laughed at how nervous they had been. They cried a little at the weight of it all, and then they sat in silence. A silence that no longer felt empty but full. They had met someone they admired, someone who reminded them that their story was bigger than they thought. And yet, the most important part was not the fame or the surprise. It was knowing that even the smallest act of kindness could reach across the world and touch a heart. The room was quiet when Aisha spoke about her father. Her voice was soft, trembling slightly. She told Keanu how her father used to remind her to hold her head high, to never let cruel words define her. She said his name with care, as though speaking it might bring him back for just a moment. The instant the name left her lips, Keanu's expression changed. His calm smile faded, his body stilled, his eyes widened, not with surprise but with recognition. Daniel noticed at first the way Keanu's breathing shifted, as if the name had struck something deep inside him. Aisha tilted her head, confused by his silence. Keanu repeated the name slowly, his voice almost a whisper. His gaze dropped to the floor for a long moment before he looked back up at Aisha. His face carried a weight neither child could fully understand. I knew someone with that name, he said finally. A long time ago. Aisha's eyebrows knitted together. You knew my father? She asked, her words cautious. Keanu nodded, his lips pressing together as memories seemed to flood back. He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. We met many years ago, before you were born. His voice was steady, but it carried something, fragile, like a hidden wound opening. Daniel glanced at Aisha, sensing how much this meant. For Aisha, it was as though the air around her shifted. She had always spoken about her father with love, with pride, but he was gone, and all she had left were stories from her mother and faded photographs. Now here was Keanu Reeves sitting in front of her, saying he had once known her father. Keanu's eyes softened as he looked at her again. He was a good man, he said quietly. Stronger than most, not because of his size or power, but because of the way he treated people. He believed in kindness, in lifting others when they were down. Aisha's throat tightened. Her eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. She had heard those words from her mother, but hearing them now from a stranger who was no stranger at all made her chest ache with longing. Daniel sat quietly, his own heart pounding. He had never known Aisha's father, but he had heard her talk about him. To think that Keanu Reeves, a man they only knew from the big screen, carried memories of him felt almost unreal. It was as if the threads of two different worlds had suddenly woven together in that moment. Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice lowered, almost as if he were talking more to himself than to them. He once helped me at a time when I was lost, he said. I was going through something heavy, and your father said something I never forgot. He told me, pain doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're alive, and as long as you're alive, you can still choose kindness. His eyes grew misty, and for a moment, Keanu Reeves wasn't the actor the world admired. He was just a man remembering someone who had touched his life. Aisha's tears slid down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. Her father's words had traveled through time, through people. and now they returned to her in the most unexpected way. She whispered, "That sounds like him." Her voice cracked. "He always told me to be strong, to be kind, even when it hurt." Keanu nodded. "And you've carried his lessons, haven't you?" Aisha nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I try," she whispered. "But sometimes it feels like it's too hard. Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough." Keanu reached out gently, placing a comforting hand over hers. His touch was steady, filled with quiet strength. "You are enough," he said firmly. "Your father would be proud of you. And what you did, facing all that cruelty and still walking forward, that's proof of his spirit in you." Daniel watched silently, moved beyond words. He had never seen anyone speak with such truth. It felt as though Keanu wasn't just speaking to Aisha, but to everyone who had ever doubted themselves. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The room was filled only with the quiet hum of the lights and the weight of the memory they all shared. Then Daniel finally broke the silence. "It's like the world brought us together for a reason," he said. His words sounded strange even to him, but Keanu smiled gently. "Maybe it did," he replied. Sometimes the smallest choices, like speaking up when it's hardest, can lead to connections we could never imagine." Aisha squeezed Daniel's hand under the table, her eyes still wet, but her smile stronger now. She felt her father's presence closer than she had in years, as if his spirit had reached across time to sit beside her in that very moment. Keanu leaned back at last, exhaling deeply. "Your father gave me strength once, and today meeting both of you has given me the same gift again." His voice cracked slightly but carried warmth. "It's strange how life circles back, reminding us that kindness is never wasted." The moment hung in the air like a sacred bond. Daniel, Aisha, and Keanu, three people tied together by courage, kindness, and a name that stopped time for a heartbeat. None of them would ever forget it. The air in the room still felt heavy after Keanu admitted he had once known Aisha's father. Daniel and Aisha sat quietly, not daring to break the silence too soon. It felt like a moment too big to rush. Aisha stared at Keanu, her eyes wide with hope and longing. "Can you tell me more?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Keanu looked down at his hands for a long moment before lifting his gaze again. His eyes were softer now, touched with memory. "Your father and I met many years ago, back when I was still struggling to find my place in the world," he began. "I was going through a dark time. I had fame, I had success, but inside I was lost, your father." He noticed. He didn't know me as an actor, he just saw a man carrying pain. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. The idea that her father, the man she missed so deeply, had once helped someone like Keanu Reeves felt unreal, yet true in the way Keanu's voice carried weight. Daniel leaned forward slightly, wanting to catch every word. "He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous," Keanu continued, "but he had a way of speaking that made people feel seen. He told me once, in the middle of a simple conversation, that the measure of a person isn't what they achieve, but what they give to others." That stayed with me. I carried those words into my life even when I didn't realize it. Aisha wiped at her tears quickly, smiling through them. "That sounds exactly like him," she whispered. "My mom used to say he was always helping people, even when we didn't have much ourselves." Keanu nodded, his eyes glistening as if he was holding back his own emotions. "I only met him a few times, but the impression he left, it never faded. Hearing his name again after so many years, it felt like the past reaching out to remind me of what matters most." Daniel shifted in his chair, his young mind struggling to process how the threads of their lives had crossed. In such an impossible way, he finally spoke. "It's like your father's kindness never stopped working. It reached Keanu back then, and now it's still reaching people through you." His words were simple, but they struck deep. Aisha turned to look at Daniel, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. He had stood up for her when she was alone, and now she was learning that the courage he showed had roots that went deeper than either of them had imagined. Her father's spirit seemed to live in both their actions. Keanu leaned closer, his voice dropping into a softer tone. "Do you know what he told me the last time I saw him?" he asked. Aisha shook her head slowly, afraid to even breathe. He told me that we may never see the results of the kindness we give, but it always matters. He said kindness plants seeds in places we may never walk, and one day, those seeds grow into something bigger than we ever dreamed. Aisha's tears flowed freely now, but they were not just tears of sadness. They were tears of connection, of comfort, of feeling her father's wisdom alive in the words of someone she had never imagined meeting, she whispered. He was right, wasn't he? Keanu smiled faintly. He was. Look at you and Daniel. Look at how one act of courage has traveled farther than you know. You changed each other's lives, and now your story is changing mine too. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Daniel felt a strange sense of awe, as if he were watching something sacred unfold. He thought back to that day on the street, when his knees had been shaking and his voice had been trembling. He had thought it was just a small act, standing up to bullies, but now he realized it was part of something far bigger. Aisha reached across the table and took Daniel's hand, her grip tight, steady. She looked at Keanu and said, "Maybe this is my father's way of reminding me that I'm not alone." Keanu nodded firmly. "You are not alone," he said. "His spirit is in you, in your kindness, and in the courage you've already shown, and as long as you carry that with you, he will never truly be gone." Daniel's chest swelled with emotion. He had never lost a parent, but in that moment, he understood something about loss and love. He realized that the people we lose leave pieces of themselves behind, in their words, in their lessons, in the lives they've touched. Keanu leaned back finally, exhaling deeply. It was clear this conversation had stirred something in him too. "It's strange," he said softly. "I came here to thank you, but I feel like I've been given a gift instead, a chance to remember someone who helped me when I needed it most." The three of them sat together for a while longer, no one in a rush to end the moment. The bond they had formed was unusual, unexpected but powerful. It wasn't about fame or stories in the news, it was about a connection built on kindness that stretched across time. When it was time to leave, Keanu stood and placed a gentle hand on both of their shoulders. "Carry his spirit forward," he said. "Every time you choose kindness, every time you choose courage, you honor him." Aisha held those words close as if they were a promise. Daniel did too, though for him it was also a reminder that bravery can echo in ways far greater than he could ever imagine. And as they watched Keanu walk away, all three of them knew this meeting wasn't an ending. It was a bridge, a connection across lives, a reminder that kindness never truly dies. The meeting with Keanu ended, but its weight stayed with Daniel and Aisha long after he walked out of the gym. They sat together for a while in silence, both trying to hold on to the moment. It felt like something too big to put into words, like a dream that had stepped into real life. Daniel finally whispered, "Did that really just happen?" Aisha smiled through her tears. "Yes," she said softly, "and it feels like my father was here with us." That night, neither of them could sleep. Daniel lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail. He remembered the way Keanu had looked him in the eyes and told him courage mattered even when you're afraid. He remembered how Aisha's father's name had changed everything, how suddenly the story of one man's kindness reached across years and touched all of them. It made Daniel realize that his choice that day on the street was not just about stopping bullies, it was about carrying forward something much bigger than himself. Aisha, meanwhile, sat with her mother at the kitchen table, retelling every word of the meeting. Her mother listened with tears streaming down her face when Aisha told her that Keanu had once known her father. Her mother gasped and held her hand tightly. "Your father's kindness has always been alive in you," she whispered. "And now you see it too," Aisha cried then. But it was not the same kind of sadness she had carried before. It was a softer grief, mixed with pride. She felt her father's love surrounding her. The next week, life at school continued as normal on the surface, but for Daniel and Aisha, nothing felt quite the same. They walked the same hallways, sat in the same classrooms, but the way they saw the world had shifted. Every laugh they shared, Every small act of kindness now felt like part of a bigger story. Their bond had deepened, and other students noticed it too. Some whispered, some smiled. Some even walked up to them to say they admired what Daniel had done. For once, Aisha felt the heavy weight of being different begin to lift, replaced by something new. Respect. Daniel also felt the change. He wasn't suddenly popular, but he no longer felt invisible. People began to see him not just as the quiet boy in the back of the class, but as someone who had chosen to be brave when it mattered. He didn't let it go to his head, but inside, he carried a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, as they walked home together, Aisha stopped suddenly on the same street where the bullies had once surrounded her. She looked at the spot, her heart no longer racing with fear. Instead, she smiled faintly. "This is where it started," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, this is where I almost fainted," he joked. They both laughed, but then grew quiet. Aisha whispered, "It doesn't feel scary anymore. Not with you here." Daniel smiled. "That's because you're stronger now. You don't even need me, but I'll still be here anyway." That moment felt like a circle closing. What had once been a place of fear was now a place of memory, not of cruelty, but of courage. They realized that the past didn't have to haunt them. It could guide them, remind them of how far they had come. As weeks turned to months, the story of Daniel and Aisha continued to spread quietly. It wasn't splashed on every headline, but it found its way into hearts. A few more articles were written, and people online continued to share it. Each time, the message was the same. Kindness matters. Courage matters. Even small acts can ripple outward in ways you cannot imagine. Daniel sometimes wondered how long people would keep talking about it, but then he remembered Keanu's words, "Kindness plants seeds." Even if the story faded from headlines, the seeds were planted, and that was enough. For Aisha, the story became more than just about the bullies. It became about her father's legacy. Every time she remembered Keanu's voice saying, "Your father would be proud," she felt stronger. She began drawing again, no longer hiding her sketches. She showed Daniel her work, and he encouraged her, reminding her that her father's spirit lived in every line she drew. Together, they carried forward what they had learned. They helped other students who were bullied. They stood beside kids who felt alone. They didn't always win every battle, but each act, no matter how small, was a piece of the kindness they had promised to carry forward. Years later, when they looked back, they realized that day on the street had changed everything. It wasn't just about bullies. It was about the chain of kindness that stretched from a father's words to a shy boy's courage, to a friendship that healed wounds, and even to the heart of a man who had lived in the spotlight. They realized the truth. Kindness never dies, it only moves forward, carried by those willing to keep it alive. And so the story ended not with fame or glory, but with something far greater, a legacy of kindness, a bond of courage, and the simple truth that when you stand up for someone, you are not just protecting them. You are planting seeds that may one day grow into something you never dreamed possible.